Most men find out their marriage is over through a long legal document or a tearful late-night confession. I found out on a rainy Tuesday in my own kitchen, and the only witness to the moment my life collapsed was a half-eaten bagel. My name is Mark Sullivan. I'm 47 years old, an architectural engineer by trade, and for 20 years I believed I was living the American dream in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. I build structures for a living, skyscrapers, bridges, and foundations that are designed to withstand the test of time and the fury of the elements. I took pride in my work, but I took even more pride in my home. I thought I had applied those same engineering principles to my marriage with Elena. We had the house with the wraparound porch, 2 kids who were currently thriving in college, and a retirement fund that was finally starting to look like a solid promise instead of a distant prayer. I was the guy who remembered every anniversary without a calendar reminder, the one who handled the complex taxes, and the man who still looked at his wife across the dinner table and saw the same vibrant girl I'd met in a university library 20 years ago. I believed in loyalty. I believed in the quiet, steady accumulation of shared memories. I thought our foundation was made of granite. Before we dive into the wreckage and I show you how that entire 20-year structure collapsed in exactly 300 seconds, do me a quick favor. If you value raw, family-centered stories like this, please subscribe to our community and hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to the people sharing these stories. Drop a comment below as you listen. I'd love to hear your perspective on what happened next. Now let me tell you about Elena. She was the anchor. A high school history teacher who could tell you the story of a revolution with such passion, you'd swear she lived through it. She was organized, thoughtful, and she had this specific morning ritual. She took her coffee black, with just a pinch of cinnamon, and she'd sit by the window watching the birds before the world got loud. I knew her rhythms like the back of my hand. I knew her favorite books, her secret fears, and the way she'd tilt her head when she was thinking. Or so I thought. That's the fatal flaw of an engineer. You trust your measurements. You trust the math because the math doesn't lie. But I forgot that people aren't made of steel and concrete. They are made of secrets. On that Tuesday evening at exactly 6:14 p.m., the facade I had spent 2 decades maintaining finally shattered. That Tuesday evening began with the kind of mundane peace that usually precedes a disaster. The rain was drumming a steady, rhythmic beat against the kitchen windows of our home in Charlotte, and the smell of a fresh load of laundry was beginning to drift through the house. Elena had been in the middle of looking up a recipe on her phone when she realized she'd left a basket in the dryer. She set the phone down on the granite kitchen island, screen up, unlocked, and disappeared into the hallway. In 20 years, I had never made it a habit to check her phone. We had that unspoken agreement of mutual trust that keeps a long-term marriage from feeling like a prison. But as I stood by the sink, rinsing a stray coffee mug, the screen lit up with a notification. My eyes drifted to it naturally. The contact name was Domino's Pizza, Main Saint. At first, my brain didn't even register it as a threat. I figured she'd ordered something for a late-night snack, even though we'd just finished a chicken stir-fry. But then, I actually read the text. It wasn't about a delivery time or a coupon code. It was a single sentence that felt like a physical blow to my chest. I still smell your perfume on my sheets. Can't wait for extra toppings tomorrow at 2 p.m. I froze. The water from the faucet was still running over my hands, but I couldn't feel it. I felt a cold, sharp stillness settle into my bones, the same way you feel when you're inspecting a building and realize the main support beam is made of rotted wood. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the name. Domino's Pizza. It was a clever disguise. A business name tucked away in plain sight so a husband wouldn't think twice about a notification appearing during dinner. But Domino's doesn't talk about the scent of perfume on bedsheets. I heard the sound of Elena's footsteps returning from the laundry room. My engineering brain, the part of me that handles crises with cold precision, took over. In 5 seconds, I memorized that phone number. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't delete the message. I simply turned back to the sink and continued rinsing the mug as if the world hadn't just ended. When she walked back in, she picked up the phone with a casual smile. She checked the notification, her thumb moving quickly as she likely swiped it away, and then she placed the phone face down. She looked at me, her eyes clear and untroubled, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I looked at the woman I had shared a bed with for 7,000 nights and realized I was looking at a master architect of lies. Those 5 minutes had changed everything. The foundation was gone. In my profession, when a structure begins to fail, it doesn't usually happen with a sudden explosion. It starts with a hairline crack in the foundation, something so small you might miss it if you aren't looking for it. For months, I hadn't been looking. I'd been the architect of my own blindness, trusting the blueprints of a 20-year marriage without ever checking the integrity of the beams. But now that the pizza delivery text had cracked the surface, I started seeing the flaws everywhere. They were hidden in plain sight, tucked away in the corners of our daily routine. I sat in my home office late that night, the blue light of my laptop screen reflecting off my glasses, and I began what I call the forensic audit of my life. I started with the phone logs. As an architectural engineer, I'm trained to analyze data sets, looking for anomalies and patterns. And there they were. The number saved as Domino's wasn't just for ordering food. There were outgoing calls at 10 a.m. while I was at a construction site visit. There were incoming texts at 11:30 p.m. while I was brushing my teeth in the master bathroom just 20 feet away. The pattern was rhythmic, clinical, and utterly devastating. Then I started looking back at Elena's schedule with new, cynical eyes. She had started advanced Pilates about 6 months ago. She claimed the classes were intense, always scheduled for Tuesday and Thursday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. She'd come home looking flushed, smelling of expensive floral soap, claiming she'd showered at the high-end gym to save time. I'd always kissed her forehead and told her I was proud of her for staying active. Now, the realization hit me like a physical weight. The gym was likely a hotel room or a studio apartment, and the intensity wasn't from a workout. It was the scent of betrayal. And then there was Sarah. Sarah was Elena's best friend, or so I had been led to believe. For the last 3 months, Sarah was supposedly going through a messy divorce. Elena was the supportive sister, often heading over to Sarah's place in Huntersville on Saturday afternoons with a bottle of wine to talk her through the tears. I had even encouraged it. I had even suggested Elena take some extra cash from our joint fund to buy Sarah a spa day to cheer her up. I felt a sick, hollow laugh bubble up in my throat. I hadn't been supporting a friend in need. I had been subsidizing my wife's double life. I did what any good engineer does when they find a critical structural defect. I didn't rush in with a sledgehammer. If you do that, the whole structure might come down on your head before you're ready. No, you shore up the surrounding areas first. You document every inch of the damage. You wait for the precise moment to perform a controlled demolition. I spent the next 4 hours downloading bank statements, cross-referencing GPS data from our shared vehicle app, and building a timeline that made my skin crawl. By 3 a.m., the architecture of doubt had been replaced by the certainty of betrayal. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man who had stopped being afraid and started being very, very calculated. Because when you've been lied to for 20 years, you don't settle for a tearful apology. You settle for the full truth, and you make sure the person who rotted the foundation is the one who bears the cost of the collapse. In the world of structural engineering, when you find a flaw that threatens the entire building, you don't just stare at it. You bring in a specialist. You bring in the guy who knows how to look behind the drywall and into the dark spaces where the rot hides. For me, that specialist was Caleb Miller. Caleb and I had been friends since our freshman year at Georgia Tech. He'd spent 15 years as a private investigator in Atlanta before retiring into corporate security. He was the kind of man who didn't see people. He saw liabilities and assets. I called him on Wednesday morning from a burner phone I'd bought at a CVS, sitting in the parking lot of a park 3 miles from my office. I didn't want a single trace of this conversation on our shared family plan. I told him everything: the 5-minute window, the pizza delivery text, and the rhythmic pattern of Elena's Pilates classes. "Mark," Caleb's voice was low, filtered through years of Georgia humidity and cheap cigars. "You're an engineer. You know that once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. If I do this, I'm going to find things that will make you wish you'd stayed blind. Are you sure?" "Verify the integrity, Caleb," I said, using our old shorthand. "Whatever is there, I need to see it." It took Caleb less than 48 hours to call me back. He didn't send an email. He told me to meet him at a quiet diner in Gastonia. When I arrived, he slid a thin manila folder across the cracked vinyl table. "The number belongs to a guy named Julian Vance," Caleb began, his eyes fixed on his coffee. "He's 32. He's a lead trainer at that high-end fitness club Elena joined last year. But he's not teaching Pilates, Mark. He's teaching her how to spend your money. Caleb explained that Julian was a professional companion of sorts, a man who targeted wealthy, bored suburban women. But Julian wasn't just a physical distraction, he was an expensive habit. This led me to the second part of my investigation, the finances. Following the pattern I'd seen in stories of betrayal, I realized that if Elena was living a second life, she needed a second wallet. I spent that night going through our emergency travel fund, a high-yield savings account we'd started 15 years ago. It was supposed to be for our 25th anniversary cruise to the Mediterranean and a just-in-case fund for our kids' future weddings. I had been the one making the deposits, but Elena, as the manager of the household, had the primary login. When I finally forced my way into the digital records, I felt the air leave my lungs. The balance should have been $85,000. It was $60,000. Over the last 18 months, Elena had been siphoning off money in small, invisible increments. $200 here, $450 there. She'd opened a hidden credit card in her name, but she was paying the monthly bill directly from our travel fund. The charges on that card were a roadmap of her betrayal. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, high-end men's cologne, and weekend spa retreats in Asheville that Caleb confirmed were actually hotel stays with Julian Vance. She hadn't just been cheating on me, she had been stealing our future to fund his present. She was using the money I earned during 60-hour work weeks to buy silk ties and premium gym memberships for a 30-year-old predator. The emergency she was using the fund for was the fact that her lover had expensive tastes. I sat in the dark of my office, the weight of the $25,000 loss sitting on my chest like a ton of lead. But as I've told you, I am a patient man. I didn't storm into the bedroom and wake her up. I didn't demand an explanation. Instead, I took a deep breath, scanned every single bank statement into a secure cloud drive, and sent a copy to my lawyer. The structure was beyond repair. Now it was time to plan the demolition. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a man when he stops being afraid and starts being dangerous. It's the kind of quiet I usually reserve for a site inspection, when I find a structural failure that everyone else has missed. You don't scream at the building. You don't throw a tantrum at the concrete. You simply step back, take your measurements, and decide how to bring it down without hurting yourself in the process. For 14 days, I became a ghost in my own life. I became someone Elena couldn't read. I woke up every morning at 6:30 a.m. just like I had for 2 decades. I made the coffee, black with a pinch of cinnamon for her, just the way she liked it. I'd set the mug on the nightstand, kiss her forehead, and tell her to have a wonderful day at the school. I watched her smile, that same vibrant smile that I now knew was a carefully constructed mask. I watched her thumb scroll through her phone over breakfast, knowing she was likely checking for a morning message from pizza delivery. I didn't confront her. I didn't let my hands shake. I remembered what my father used to say, "Vengeance is a lazy man's game, but justice belongs to the patient." Before I tell you about the meeting with my lawyer, let's take a quick second. Stories like this are hard to tell, but they need to be heard. If you're finding value in this journey of truth and precision, please hit that like button and subscribe to our community. We're growing every day, and your support helps us keep sharing these raw, real-life accounts. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to play a part just to catch someone in a lie? I'd love to read your experiences. On the third day of my performance, I met with Robert Vance. Robert is a high-stakes divorce attorney in downtown Charlotte, the kind of man who treats a marriage contract like a structural blueprint. He looks for every weak point and every loophole. We sat in his office overlooking the skyline, and I laid out the forensic audit Caleb and I had compiled. "Mark," Robert said, leaning back in his leather chair, "most men in your position walk in here wanting to burn the house down. They want to scream, they want to fight. But the law doesn't care about your feelings, it cares about the math." "I'm an engineer, Robert," I replied, my voice as steady as a foundation pier. "I only care about the math. She's siphoned $25,000 from a joint account intended for our future. She's used our shared assets to fund an affair with a man who target marketed her boredom. I want the house, I want the retirement accounts protected, and I want her to realize that when you rot the foundation, you lose the right to live in the building." Robert nodded. "Then we play the long game. You stay in the house. You act the part. Do not change the locks. Do not move your money yet. We need her to stay comfortable. A comfortable person is a careless person." So, I stayed comfortable. I sat through dinners where she talked about her stressful day at school. I listened to her complain about Sarah's fictional divorce drama. I even sat through a Sunday brunch with her parents, nodding and smiling while the $25,000 theft burned a hole in my pocket. I was building her a prison, brick by brick, and she was so busy looking at her phone that she didn't even notice the walls going up. She thought I was just Mark, the reliable, slightly predictable husband who couldn't see past what was right in front of him. She knew my signature, but she never knew my spine. And as the date for the 2 p.m. extra toppings delivery approached, I felt the last of my anger transform into something much colder. Something absolute. The day of the extra toppings delivery arrived exactly 14 days after I first saw that text. It was a clear, crisp Thursday in Charlotte, the kind of day that usually makes me feel optimistic about the future of my projects. But today, I wasn't an engineer looking at a building. I was an architect preparing for a controlled demolition. At 7 a.m., I sat across from Elena at the breakfast nook. I told her I had an urgent structural audit in Raleigh and that I wouldn't be back until late that night. I watched her eyes. They didn't flicker with guilt. They brightened with opportunity. She actually got up and packed me a small bag of trail mix for the drive. "Don't work too hard, Mark," she said, leaning in to give me a kiss that felt like cold ash against my skin. "I'll probably just stay in, do some grading for school, and maybe head to the gym for an extra Pilates session." I nodded, took the trail mix, and drove away. But I didn't go to Raleigh. I drove 3 blocks over to a parking lot where Caleb was waiting in a nondescript gray sedan. He handed me a tablet. "They're confirmed for 2 p.m. at the Gilded Oak," Caleb said. I felt a sharp, jagged pain in my gut. The Gilded Oak was the restaurant where we had celebrated our 10th, 15th, and 19th anniversaries. It was our place. To Elena, it was just a convenient backdrop for her betrayal. As we wait for the final act to unfold, I want to remind you that these stories are about more than just heartbreak. They are about the strength it takes to seek the truth. If you're standing with me in this story, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Your support keeps this community alive and ensures these raw, honest accounts continue to be told. Drop a comment below. At what point would you have walked away? I spent the next few hours in a nearby coffee shop, looking at a 20-year wedding album I had taken from the hallway shelf. I looked at the photos of our wedding in Charleston, the birth of our daughter in Charlotte Memorial, and our first housewarming party. Every smile in those photos now felt like a counterfeit bill. At 1:50 p.m., I walked into the Gilded Oak. I wasn't wearing my work vest or carrying a blueprint. I was wearing the navy suit I'd bought for our daughter's graduation. I saw them immediately. They were seated in the back corner, at the very table where I had toasted to our forever just a year ago. Julian Vance looked exactly like the man in Caleb's photos, young, polished, and wearing a watch that I had effectively paid for with my siphoned savings. He was laughing at something she said. Elena was leaning in, her hand resting on his arm, looking at him with the same light in her eyes that I thought was reserved only for me. I didn't rush. I didn't yell. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a man who has checked his measurements twice. When I reached the table, the laughter died instantly. Elena's face went from a healthy glow to the color of wet chalk in 3 seconds. "Mark?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What? What are you doing here? I thought you were in Raleigh." I didn't look at her. I looked at Julian. He started to stand up, acting like he was going to be the alpha in the room. I placed a hand on his shoulder, not a shove, just a firm, heavy weight that told him to stay exactly where he was. "The audit in Raleigh was canceled," I said, my voice as calm as a graveyard. "It turns out the foundation was already too far gone to save." I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a thick envelope and the wedding album. I placed them on the table right next to their expensive wine glasses. "I heard there was a delivery for 2 p.m., I said, looking Elena directly in the eyes. "This is the full disclosure package. It includes 20 years of memories and the legal papers to end them. I think you'll find the extra toppings in the second section. It's the itemized list of the $25,000 you stole from our children's future to pay for this lunch." I stood there for 5 seconds of absolute suffocating silence. I watched the realization sink in. She wasn't just caught in an affair. She was caught in a forensic trap. I didn't wait for her to cry. I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned around and walked out into the sunlight, leaving the ruins of my past on that table. Walking out of the Gilded Oak, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I heard the sound of Elena's voice, that high-pitched, desperate tone she used when she was trapped. But you can't talk your way out of a forensic audit. Julian, her pizza delivery lover, didn't even chase her. Once the bank accounts were frozen and the legal pressure mounted, the trainer showed his true colors. He was gone before the check arrived. The next 6 months were a masterclass in precision. Elena tried every desperate tactic, tears, anger, and even mental health pleas. But Robert, my lawyer, had the receipts. The judge in Mecklenburg County didn't see a confused wife. He saw a systematic thief who siphoned $25,000 from her own children. I kept our Charlotte home. Elena moved into a small apartment, her curated life replaced by the cold reality of her choices. Julian vanished, looking for his next target. I sit on my porch now, watching the sun set over the North Carolina pines. The air feels honest, clean, and free of the scent of cinnamon-tainted lies. I lost a 20-year marriage, but I found my spine. And in engineering, I'll take a solid spine over a rotted foundation every time. If this story resonated, please subscribe and hit that like button. Your support keeps these raw stories alive. Comment below, what would your last move be? I'm Mark Sullivan. Thank you for listening.